Hey there, Openforcers, and welcome back to this episode of the Gig Academy. Today, we have a special edition episode that we're going to be doing. And just fair warning, there are going to be some, kind of heavier topics than what we've discussed in the past. We're going to be definitely talking about human trafficking and everything that goes in that field. I am so happy to have Laura Cyrus here from Truckers Against Trafficking on the line. And this is definitely professionally probably the most important thing I have ever done to date. So very excited to have you, Laura. Would you like to introduce yourself to our guests or
Sure,
our audience? I'm sorry.
absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks, Nick. My name is Laura. I am the Director of Corporate Engagement for Truckers Against Trafficking. Um, and there's so much more that I'll share and say about that. But yeah, I'm really pleased to be here and just grateful for the opportunity to have a discussion with you.
Well, thank you again. And we're so happy to have you. I'm a big fan of the podcast you guys have, Driving Freedom. Binged all of your episodes when I'm in the gym in the morning to just understand what human trafficking is and everything that goes with it. And I'm really excited for this discussion because it's not as obvious as people, and myself included, might think it is. So kicking things off. So tell me about Truckers Against Trafficking and how did it get started?
Yeah, this is so great. So I have to say, I was not there at the ground level, but I
All
came
right.
in shortly after. Um, so Truckers Against Trafficking was formed in 2009 initially. We became our own 501c3 in 2011. But in 2009, and really a year or so before that, one of our co-founders, her name is Lynn Lieberg, she read a book called Not for Sale by a man named David Batstone. And it's a great read if you're interested in
Yeah.
anti-trafficking work. And she read this book and was just really um, called and convicted, quite honestly, to
Yeah.
to do something to be a part of the end of this global crime, helping to combat it. And so she gathered her four daughters, who are all
Wow.
powerhouse women in their own unique ways, just a really amazing family. And she said, we need to do something about this. We need to be a part of this. And so one of the first things that they did was they organized an anti-trafficking awareness conference. They hosted this,
Okay.
they put it on. This was in Denver, Colorado. Um, and they organized various field experts to come in and speak. And one of the speakers that they brought in was an FBI agent, and
Okay.
this agent was sharing just about human trafficking statistics and cases sort of across the nation. And one of the things that he mentioned was that truck stops were one of the places, one of many places, right, that human trafficking can take place. And as he was talking just about involving different people in different industries, he was just kind of riffing and saying, hey, what if gas station attendants, what if gas station employees were trained, or these folks were trained, or these folks were trained. And as she's sitting there listening to this, Lynn had this light bulb moment, because as a young girl, her parents owned and operated a small motel. And some of
Wow.
their best customers or clients or guests were truck drivers. And the motel was small enough and intimate enough that her mom would set out the continental breakfast every morning, for these truck drivers. And Lynn, pretty literally grew up around the breakfast table with truck drivers and knew them to
Wow.
be, family oriented, give you the shirt off their back kind of people. And so as she's sitting there listening to this light bulb goes off, and she's like, we need to train truckers. We need to train the trucking industry, because we know it's happening at these locations. We know truck drivers are all over the country. There are more of them at any given time on the roads than there are law enforcement officers. Like it just made sense. And so um, after that conference that they put on, they kind of decided to organize, and this TAT initiative, Truckers Against Trafficking initiative, was born. Um, Initially it had kind of been part of this family ministry that they had, but then ultimately, as they like to say, the tail just started wagging the dog, and TAT broke free and became its own just 501c3 organization. And there really was no no connection to the industry when they started this work. And it really was about making connections, finding those connections, figuring out what was going to be most useful to the people in the industry to get them trained. What do we do? How do we train these people? Right. And so it really kind of snowballed from there. And so now, we are a Denver-based, really national, but working internationally,
Yeah.
nonprofit, and we exist to educate, equip, empower, and mobilize members of the trucking, bus, and energy industries to help us combat human trafficking, just as part of their everyday jobs. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah. That's an amazing story. I didn't know all of that going into this. But that is just so cool how, just finding that calling and just chasing it down and here we are. That's so
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's really cool.
Yeah. It's interesting too. And I think it's really cool how you guys started here domestically in the US, because going into this, when I first heard about trafficking, and kind of my first exposure to it was like back in high school, but it was in a different way. I don't know if you remember that documentary about the invisible children. And I mean, that was, in Africa, and there was, child soldiers and stuff. That's kind of a form of trafficking. That was like my first exposure to it. So in my mind, until, adulthood, it was, very far away and removed, and it was more of a violent nature, not, a sexual or, I think it really, soul crushing, in a lot of ways, not to diminish, child soldiers and everything those kids go through and everything, but definitely an eye-opening thing that it's actually happening here on our shores in so many ways. So really happy that she chased that down and created this organization, and are really utilizing the kind of lifeblood of our nation. So so with that in mind, how are truckers and couriers kind of uniquely positioned to help stop trafficking? And to date, what has the impact been for TAT trained truckers and couriers?
Yeah. So I think the neat thing about transportation is there is this natural intersection with this crime. And like you're saying, it's not something that people necessarily really connect the dots with initially. But when you consider that traffickers are exploiting their victims at truck stops, rest areas, hotels, motels, along city streets, even at businesses. I mean, these are places, we're never going to say, and it's not true, that truck stops are the number one place or rest areas are the number one place where this happens, because that's not true. But it is happening at these locations. In addition to exploiting the victims, these traffickers are exploiting these locations. And so what we recognized was, okay, there are 3 whatever million CDL holders across the US. What if we can train them to recognize these signs, give them the tools to know what to do? Will they take this information? Will they run with it? Will they, really rise up and be those knights of the highway that they see themselves as? And so, very quickly on, we learned that absolutely they would get involved. And so by creating this training that's easily shared via social media or a learning management system, or we work with a ton of trucking companies implementing it into new driver orientation or regular safety training, this gave the opportunity for this training to just explode. So we've now trained over 1.2 million people with the training material that we provide. And we know that truck drivers alone have made over 2,800 calls to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And those calls have helped to identify over 1,300 victims of human trafficking across the United States. And that's just one slice of the data. That's the only slice of data that we know, right? So nobody tracks calls made to 911 or calls to non-emergency numbers. So we know that there are other calls being made. We just don't have access to that information. But I think the neat thing about this, I've met thousands of drivers. We go to truck shows and all kinds of different industry events. And I work with some of the, just some of the best men and women that are a part of the transportation industry. And just having conversations with them. I can share one story of a friend and a professional driver
Yes,
that
please.
he shares frequently. Um, before he was TAT trained 10 plus so years ago, he was driving, he was parked, it was raining, he was at parked somewhere for the night, and he got a knock on his window at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. or whatever, and was just, as he tells it, so upset that somebody was interrupting his sleep, and so he rolls down his window to get ready to just yell at this person, get away, and he sees it's a young woman. And looking back now, he says, I know it was a minor. And she just had this dead look in her eyes, and she said something to the effect of, do you want some company, or something like that. And he just said, "Hey, get away from me, I don't want anything that you're selling, leave me alone," and rolled his window back up and was just so upset and mad and had a hard time going back to sleep. Well, flash forward 10 or so years, he goes through the TAT training, and it hits him. He recognizes after the fact that young woman, likely a kid, was a victim of human trafficking. He said, I
Oh
know,
man.
I know. And it was such a
Yeah.
missed opportunity. And just he said, it haunts me. And that really is his motivation for being a part of this work now, having the education, having the language, right, to know when these guys are calling law enforcement, or when they're calling the National Human Trafficking Hotline, it's not just, oh, I'm seeing something weird. It's like, no, I'm seeing these red flags. This is the language that I have to describe this. I think it's human trafficking, X, Y, and Z reasons. This is why I believe this is what it is. And they're able to give this credible information to law enforcement. They're able to give them, make and model of a vehicle, and description of occupants, and, a description of what is going on in this situation. Anyway, this is his reason for being a part of this work. And I think it's those stories, and hearing, circling back to my initial statement, but hearing, from drivers that have
Yeah.
this same story of like, hey, now that I know, I know I've been seeing this for decades, and I just didn't know what to call it, or I didn't really know what I was looking at, or I didn't really know there was anything I could do. But now we have empowered 1.2 million plus people to be a part of this mobile army that are out there, quite honestly, changing and saving lives.
That is so amazing, and such an amazing story too. And for those listening, I mean, I hope no one's missed an opportunity. But today, I hope that we're going to talk about some steps that someone can take to to recognize the signs. So if they're listening to this right now, in January, when this is released, Human Trafficking Month, that they can, if they see it, they can take the steps that they need to take to help someone that's in that type of situation, could help that individual. So Laura, what's your why? How did you get involved with Truckers Against Trafficking?
Yeah, it's a great story. So the short version of a very long story is, I had an interesting experience happen to me when I was in college as an undergraduate, and not a trafficking situation. I am not a survivor of human trafficking, so I just want to make that clear. But had a unique experience that allowed me to participate in the witnessing of the justice system, and
Oh, wow.
really caused me to be very focused on what I could do to help women, and to help victims of domestic violence, and any sort of crime, and not just women, but with a focus. And
Yeah.
so I ended up changing my major, and studying criminal justice and women's studies, and really was kind of focused on, okay, I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I was going to do something
Yeah.
to help people. And my senior year as an undergraduate, I went and heard a missionary speak about human trafficking, and she was actually talking about her organization that was overseas in Greece, actually, and
Oh, okay, cool.
talking about
Wow.
all of the stuff that she was doing, and I was
Yeah.
just floored that I had not heard anything about human trafficking in my coursework as a criminal justice student. And this was not so, I mean, I realize I look kind of young, but it was a while ago. and and I just was shocked that this had never come up in any of my coursework. So I'm listening, and she ends up kind of bringing it home, bringing it back to the US, and referencing this case out of California, where there had been a sweatshop, essentially. There was a garment factory, and they were using forced labor, victims of human trafficking, forced labor,
Wow.
to produce these garments. And some of those garments ended up being sold at major department stores. And at the time,
Really?
I had just purchased 2 dresses from a major department store here, and
Okay.
I was getting ready to graduate and like go out and do interviews. And so I had, wanted to get this like polished wardrobe or whatever. And I was just like floored. Like it had never crossed my mind previously to consider who made my clothing, or who
Yeah.
produced my coffee, or my
Yeah.
chocolate, or the rubber
Yeah.
in my tires, or any of these things, right? And
Mhm.
it literally just had never considered it. And so I'm sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I can't say for sure that I'm pretty sure those dresses that I bought weren't purchased by that, victims of that particular situation.
Right. Yeah.
But the point was, I didn't know. And I was just so convicted that night to do something, to help combat human trafficking. And again, initially I was really motivated. You mentioned you had learned about child soldiers, and that is absolutely a part
Mhm.
of this. And I was very motivated by the
Yeah.
forced labor aspect. And just decided, like, okay, this is right kind of in line with what I was hoping I would do. It's a little bit outside of the scope of my studies or whatever. And so
Yeah.
anyway, I graduated, didn't get a job in my field, graduated in the midst of a huge recession. And
Yeah. That's how it went for me too. So I feel you.
yep. Kind of had to pivot, did some like random work in the business
Mhm.
world, and kind of got
Okay.
some interesting experience that I hadn't ever really considered myself going down, but had a chance to
Yeah.
build a website and do a web show and do radio and do a number of different things that at the time seemed very random. And ultimately I felt like, okay, I need to move on. I need to do something that's a little more fulfilling. Found a graduate program at the University of Denver,
Mhm.
did a master's in international human rights with concentrations in forced labor and human trafficking. And really it was during my time, I'm getting there, it's a long story, I said it was short. um, it was during my time in my graduate program that I interned with Truckers Against
Mhm.
Trafficking. And that was just really it for me. And I have never left. So I've been here 9 years, just about. And I'm really grateful for the chance to be a part of this work. Yeah.
That's so awesome.
No previous experience either with transportation. No knowledge, no understanding really about trucking or
Yeah.
anything else. Have learned a lot on the fly. So yeah.
Hey, you and me both. I came from the dental industry before I got into trucking and courier here at Openforce, and and everything that we do. So
Yep.
yeah, it's trial by fire, but it's great because it is a
Yes.
great industry, and like you said, the people are just wonderful. So
Yep. Yep.
that's awesome. That's awesome. So when you came over and kind of going into our next question here, we're one of the things that I found that was so informative, listening to the podcast, listening to your training, about those individuals that are being trafficked, aren't necessarily kidnapped, might not look or even appear the way you might think, like one of the examples on one of your podcasts, there was a lady from Canada, and she was like upper middle class, and she had all the nice clothes, did ballet, was a popular girl, and she was being trafficked by one of her family members. So my question is, how have preconceived notions surrounding trafficking and other misinformation, kind of impacted, the progress in ending it? What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, this is such a great question. And it's something that we get quite frequently, especially when you're working with drivers who, may be or whoever may be out and they're saying, well, if this is somebody that's held against their will and they're not choosing to do this, why don't they beg for help or scream or cry out
Right.
or get somebody's
Yeah.
attention?
Yeah.
And it truly is, the mental and emotional chains of force, fraud, and coercion that
Yeah.
these traffickers, these are the methods that they're using to control these victims. And so, especially when we talk about misinformation, I think the important thing to remember is, right, the majority of these cases do not begin with kidnapping. Does it happen? Yes, it absolutely does.
Right.
It does. It happens sometimes. But the majority of victims of human trafficking know their trafficker, whether that is a family member, whether it's a friend of the family, or even some relationship that has started online. We see this a lot on social media with, traffickers that groom their victims over the period of weeks or even months, trying to gain and
Wow.
earn the trust of that victim. And so I think one of the detrimental aspects of things like the movie Taken, or some
Yeah.
of these very sensational cases that do begin with kidnapping. Again, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but one of the
Right.
problems is when we, especially as parents or just as citizens or whatever, think that trafficking, you know for folks that are just listening, I'm making a making a box with my hands. Trafficking does not fit neatly in this box of, oh, it always begins with kidnapping. And if that's what you're looking out for, you are going to miss the reality that people around you may actually be victims, and it's not going to
Yeah.
look like, oh, this person was abducted or taken away. It does not typically present itself that way. So it's important to understand kind of the truth behind that, so that you don't miss it, and so that
Definitely.
you don't say, oh, well, you weren't, this person, they weren't kidnapped, they weren't taken against their will, they can't be a trafficking victim. No, actually, they could. Absolutely.
Definitely. So for those in the trucking courier space that are maybe listening to the podcast, and just for average people like me, like I think I might have said it earlier, I'm not sure. My mom is going to be listening to this because she's very passionate. So hi, mom.
Hi,
Um,
Mom.
but what are some of those warning signs to be aware of for a trafficked individual or individuals, and what
Yeah.
to breaking down to the preconceived notions? A lot of people think a young woman, or maybe even underage girl. I was kind of blown away again listening to your podcast of what a trafficked person might look like, and it wasn't what I expected.
Yeah. Yeah. So first, let's address that. Right. This is happening
Yeah.
to adult men and adult women, as well as boys and girls. There is no, um, you know, socioeconomic, racial, gender, neat sort of box that a trafficking victim will always fit into. This is happening to kids from affluent neighborhoods and great two-parent family, homes,
Yeah.
to kids and people that don't experience that as well. So that, I think, is another myth that needs to be busted, that, oh, I live in this kind of neighborhood or this kind of community, so I'm insulated from this crime isn't going to happen to my kid potentially. It's not true. Not only that, but I think, certainly our kids are the most vulnerable among us in society.
Mhm.
We have to protect them. This is happening to our kids. But we also need to remember that this is happening to adult victims as well. And those victims need to be seen just as much as our young kids that are a part of this. And you have to consider that most adult victims, unfortunately, they too were groomed and sort of pulled into this life when they were young, when they were children, and then everybody grows up, right? Everybody becomes an
Yeah.
adult. So just because it's someone who's over 18 doesn't mean that it's somebody that's there by choice. So that's the first thing. We have to understand all races, all genders, all ages, all socioeconomic classes, right?
Yeah.
But what couriers, what drivers can be looking out for, especially, the two most obvious signs that we tell are anytime you see a minor that you believe is
Mhm.
engaged in a commercial sex act or soliciting commercial sex, automatically red flag, likely a victim of
Mhm.
human trafficking. Because Force, fraud, and coercion do not need to be proved in an adult human trafficking case. Only
Okay.
in an adult human trafficking case. Anytime you have a minor,
Okay.
they are automatically a victim. There is no such thing as a child prostitute. Literally, it cannot
Right.
exist because kids cannot
Definitely.
consent. Therefore, it's just
Absolutely.
impossible, right? The
Yeah.
media and news stories, I think it's getting better now with the
Mhm.
terminology that's used, but yeah, no such thing as a child prostitute. So that first red flag, minors. Second red flag, anytime you see someone that you believe is under the control of a pimp, regardless of the age or gender of not only that victim, but the potential pimp as well. Pimps are not just men, they can be women. Anytime you see someone under the control of a pimp, that's another red flag. And in these two cases, especially, we're saying call that national hotline immediately.
Mhm.
That hotline number is 1-888-373-7888. And that is the number that anybody in the United States can call at any time, 24/7, to speak with a trained operator. And that person will help the caller determine if what they're looking at is likely human trafficking or not. If it is, the
Gotcha.
hotline can relay that information to local law enforcement, and
Okay.
or they may ask the caller to hang up and dial 911. So there are so many other red flags. I could really, you can tell I could go on and have this conversation.
Definitely. Yeah.
But I would really encourage, especially the couriers, those folks that are local delivery, final mile, that kind of thing. We just released a brand new training specific to local drivers. Anybody that's in and out of neighborhoods or office parks, anybody that's going home every day. Don't
Okay.
think that,
Yeah.
I'm not an OTR driver, so Truckers Against Trafficking doesn't apply to me. No, we have training that is specific to your niche industry as well. So take a look. But I mean, some of the other red flags, like as you're in and out of neighborhoods, right? Do you see incredible security measures for a particular house that just seem out of place? So many cameras or bars on the windows, or
Yeah.
just
Locks on
something
the
that
outside the
just,
doors, I think, was
yes,
when
yeah.
I heard. Yeah.
Yep. If you're
Okay.
in a home and you see a particular, door that is locked from the outside, so that whoever's in that room cannot get out, that is a huge red flag. Speaking more to those in-home folks, if you see evidence of, pornography or sex toys, or just tons of used condoms and all kinds of stuff that just seems out of place. Most people keep that stuff, if they have it, they keep it
Right.
put away, right? Not
Yeah.
out in the
Absolutely.
open. One of these other things, other red flags for a moving and storage and in-home delivery, which could apply for
Okay.
anybody working in homes. This
Oh
is a
yeah.
training that we're releasing in early 2022. One of the other red flags that's mentioned is, just continually looping pornography that's just on TV screens, that's just looping constantly.
Okay.
Used condoms or paraphernalia that's in a bedroom or a bathroom that may look like it's attached or associated with a child's bedroom.
Okay.
Video equipment that's kept in closets or rooms that look like they're children's bedrooms, especially. These are all red flags, and the survivor that shares in this training video says, we had professional movers, we had plumbers, we had cable guys, we had all these people that over the course of her exploitation, being trafficked by her mother in their own
Man.
home. She
Oh
said,
my
all of
gosh.
these people came into our house, and there's no way that all of those healthy, normal adults could walk into our home and not see everything that they saw, and
Yeah.
just brush it off and think, oh, that's not weird, or that's out of
Yeah.
place, or something's wrong. She goes on to say, if just one of those people had made a call, imagine the literal years of exploitation that could have been prevented in her situation.
Yeah.
And, it's hard to know, did those people just not notice? Were they embarrassed? Did they not know what was going on? Did they not know there was something they could do? That's where we're
Yeah.
really trying to fill the gap. We are trying to say, no, these are the red flags, and there is something you can do. You can make an anonymous phone call. That's it. You don't have to be responsible for the recovery and the total, lifelong journey that survivor is going to have to be on to overcome that situation. That's not on you. All you have to do is make a phone call. All you have to
Yeah,
do is keep your eyes open and make an anonymous call, and potentially, again, help somebody get out of that situation.
absolutely. And just want to stop here real quick and say, if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're seeing something happen, please hit pause, and dial 1-888-3737-888. And, Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, you're not going to be hit on the head or reprimanded or, arrested for, accidentally, assuming a situation was trafficking and it ended up not being, correct?
That's correct.
Better safe than sorry, right?
That's right. You can make that anonymous
Yeah.
call. And literally the hotline has told us, tell people, it is better to call and be wrong. There is no penalty. It's better to call and be wrong than for you not to call and have that victim
Yeah.
continue to endure, a life of trafficking. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a tough story to hear, but I think that's what's so awesome is that, she's out of it, and that she is able to share her example, and it's, we're here talking about it. I think it's empowering for her, and, potentially can help, other people in her that were in a similar situation as her, get out of it.
Absolutely.
So that's awesome that she's able to share that. Kind of going in line with that, and this one, in today's day and age, I used to be a high school leader at the church I was going to. And so navigating this world of, high school and social media and all this other stuff, especially in the age of COVID, fortunately, my guys are in college now, so I don't have to worry about them quite as much. They're coming back from their first semester of college. So I'm getting a lot of interesting stories and being like, oh man. But, for those listening, in one of your podcasts, you talked about, grooming going on, and it can be going on via social media, and you can be sitting on the couch with your child and have no idea that they're being groomed, and how a lot of these, groomings start there, unbeknownst to the parent, and end up in, a trafficking situation. How do parents take, and this goes for everyone, because truckers have children. I've got a daughter. Everyone needs to be aware of this piece of information, because this is shaping the fabric of our society, exponentially quicker than I think any of us really understand or comprehend or want it to. But how do we keep that door from grooming opening, but then from grooming to trafficking, in terms of social media?
Yeah. And this one, this is another, it's just, there's so much to unpack with this, but basic things that parents can do. And I'm a parent as well. Thankfully, my daughter is not quite old enough yet to be at this junction, but the groundwork starts now. Truly the groundwork starts when they're so little, and just having open and honest conversations about what is appropriate, what's not, using right, like, scientific language to describe body parts, so that there's no pet language or just different things. You want them to speak scientific terms when they're talking about their body or when people touch them on their body. Having good boundaries, right? This is, I think in our generation, we're moving this way. But if a kid doesn't want to give a hug to a relative or a friend of the family or whatever, like, don't force that, right? They can have autonomy in some respects, right, over their body and who they choose to give physical affection to or not. And that's a very important thing. Setting those boundaries from the beginning, giving your kid that power and that ownership over their own body and what they do, is very important. As it gets into social media and the kids get older, this is hard. And I don't think, I've thought about this being a parent myself. It's like, I'm not going to give my kid a cell phone till she's 18. Like, but
That's kind of where I'm at.
Right. I know, but it's also the way our world is headed. I don't really know if that's feasible. It's a great goal. And hey, if you're a parent that has pulled that off, congratulations to you, because you have done a very, very hard thing, but a very good thing.
They might be microchipping us here pretty soon.
Yeah,
Elon Musk is wanting to put chips in our brain and
oh
everything.
my gosh,
so we might not even have this anymore. So
that's right. Oh gosh, what a world we live in.
I know, right?
But having boundaries, there are some apps that you can get that monitor social media usage. Those are great things to look out for. But I also think just simple things, turning off location services on some of those apps, turning off the ability to DM. I know that's not available on every single app, but that is a great option. If you are going to allow direct messages, just having frank and honest conversations about, hey, if you get direct messages from strangers, like, please let me know right away, because there are people out there that want to hurt you, that want to, you don't want to scare the pants off your kid. You don't want to terrify them. But at the same time, I think once kids become a certain age, 13, 14, I think it's really important to have these frank conversations about the reality of human trafficking and what happens. We have a PG-13 rating on our training video. But I would say if your kids are of age, have them watch it, because it features the story of a young woman who was trafficked with her cousin. They were 14 and 15 years old, talking about how they were walking down to get a Frosty at Wendy's, and there was this car that rolled up, and it was a friend of a friend, and they got in because they didn't think anything of it, and things, changed very quickly. So just having your kids understand the reality. Kids aren't dumb, right? They're not. They do listen. They absorb so much. We know the brain doesn't stop developing until 25. And so that's why they can't often think critically about some of these situations and what the best avenue would be once things happen. But as a parent, that's where you can come in and say, hey, this type of a message is inappropriate. This type of a person contacting you is inappropriate. Please don't hide these things from me. And I think the more you can have that open and honest dialogue and that building of trust, that is so important. I would say don't allow devices in bedrooms, right? Don't have unsupervised time online. And the other thing as parents, and I know I'm guilty of this just as much as anybody else, but set those boundaries, model those boundaries yourself, turn your phones off, put them in the kitchen or in the basement, charge them in places outside of your bedroom, right? Don't let that be the first thing that you look at in the morning. There's all kinds of other, I mean, not only just from that perspective, but right. Just exactly. Set those, model that behavior yourself.
Definitely. Yeah.
Truly, there's so much about social media and grooming and how traffickers use it to, again, just fish, right? Fishing. We're all familiar with that via the email connotations and phishing emails that come through. That's what traffickers are doing. They are looking for kids that are posting certain things, right? Obviously, I can't believe I haven't mentioned this. Make sure they have a private profile, right? Turn on privacy settings. Only approve, friends that and vet, and you can approve them. But they're looking for kids, and they know how to sniff out, for lack of a better word, those kids that might be experiencing some vulnerabilities. Are they in the foster care system? Have they recently aged out of foster care? Do they, experience some kind of abuse at home? Are they just experiencing some kind of marginalization? And that's different than how we might think of it, like, oh, the homeless or the hungry or whatever. I mean, those could absolutely also be vulnerabilities for kids, but
definitely
just in that space of knowing that these traffickers know how to recruit and groom their victims. And so the more you can get ahead of that, the better. I will say that podcast episode that we have is fantastic. I would point anybody to the Crime Stoppers of Houston website. I know that may seem a little random, but the Crime Stoppers of Houston, that was one of our guests. They have an excellent set of resources for social media safety, for the intersections with human trafficking. It is fantastic. And so if you're a parent, I would highly suggest you check that out, because you may learn some things.
Definitely. And, we're coming up on time here, and there's so much more that I would love to dig in with. But one thing too, and again, going back to one of your podcasts, you had two gentlemen on, and they were talking about sitting down with their sons and talking about pornography, and how pornography, and we've seen kind of like the headlines about Pornhub, and how it's actually a lot of like the videos they've had have either been non-consensual or
Yes.
actually outright sex trafficking going on.
Yep.
And I thought that was really powerful. And like I said, being been a high school leader at church and everything, and now still being in some of my guys' lives, obviously I've had some of those talks with them already.
Yeah.
About what that kind of, how it rewires your brain, the dopamine hit and everything. But just to now knowing and being empowered with even that information, and just the injustice of it and how wrong it is, I think is really important, conversation to have with your children as well. Not to be the moral police here on that, but I think it's a very important conversation, because I didn't know that was happening as much as it is. So definitely could keep going on that line of talking and everything and such. But final two questions, and then I definitely want to hear your closing thoughts, Laura. And maybe at some point we can have you on here again, because I've really enjoyed this podcast. And again, like I said at the beginning, this is definitely the most important thing I've done professionally, and maybe, well, except for being a husband and father, that's more important, but for me personally. But this is so important. And it's something that we all can, be on the lookout for. So with that in mind, if someone's listening to the podcast right now, see something fishy, we talked about the hotline, and they're, out and about doing a delivery, maybe they're grocery shopping, what should they do? And what is the process to get involved and provide assistance to a trafficked individual? Or should they, be that hands-on?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'll try to, yes, we could keep going for a long time here. But I think absolutely what we say, anytime you see one red flag, well, that's just one red flag. It may or may not mean anything. Somebody might just be having a bad day, or maybe, whatever. But if you start to notice more than one suspicious looking thing, just pay attention, try to get some of that information down that would be helpful to law enforcement. So can you, get a license plate, or the make and model of a car, or description of people that you think are in this situation. Another thing, and this may seem overly simple, but I have heard so many survivors say, if somebody just would have asked me if I needed help, or if there was something they could do for me. Again, maybe you're not gonna help that person get out of that situation that day, and in most cases that isn't what happens. Just because of the complex nature of this crime and situation. But even if you can offer basic human kindness and dignity and decency to everybody that you interact with, that might be the difference that makes that person able to leave that situation, or ask for help, or literally feel like they could trust you enough to say, hey, no, yeah, I need help. Can you please help me get out of this situation? So calling the national hotline and or 911, if you suspect something is going on. And then the other great thing about the hotline, and this is something people can remember, a survivor can call that hotline and get access to victim services anywhere in the country. So
excellent.
Survivors, that is a fantastic resource for them as well, because they can call no matter where they are. The hotline has a network of service providers all across the nation. They know who's doing work where, and they can help get that person to safety and to help. And one quick example of that, we had a driver that was delivering his load. This is an OTR driver delivering his load. It was 3 a.m. He was delayed. He was having to wait hours and hours to get his load, delivered. It was in an industrial area in California. A woman comes up to his door, knocks on his window. She has no shoes, no cell phone, no identification, literally all of her belongings in a bag. She said she had just fought off her would-be trafficker. He dumped her there in this industrial place, and she was in desperate need of help. That truck driver thankfully had been trained in the Truckers Against Trafficking training. flipped out his phone. They called the national hotline together. That hotline was able to arrange a prepaid cab ride to get that woman to a local shelter where she was safe for the night. And they also arranged a prepaid train ticket home to a neighboring state the next day. So that was an example, again, of the person being in the right place at the right time with the right training. And he was able to help her call that hotline and get
That's
that
awesome.
assistance. So yes.
Well, and she was reunited with her family too, right?
Yes.
And everything.
Yep.
Yeah, that's so. Yeah, that story was a great one. I love that story. It's so great to hear that. So closing question, and being that this is going to air in January when it's Human Trafficking Month awareness. So for those listening and want to get involved to help fight trafficking, where can they start, and where should they go? Obviously the website, the podcast. I don't know if you want to say those again. We'll include those in the show notes, everyone. Please check those. But Laura, how can someone get, honestly, me too. I'm asking for myself here.
Yeah.
How do I get started?
Yeah, I think the best place for everybody to start is to get trained. Go to education.truckersagainsttrafficking.org. We have all of our certificate programs there, specific, again, to trucking, local drivers, energy, bus industry. If you are in or have proximity to any of those industries, please go and take that training. You are also welcome to watch our main trucking training, which is available on the homepage of our website. You don't have to register or anything like that. It's right there at truckersagainsttrafficking.org. Start there. I would say follow us on social media. We are on Facebook,
Awesome.
Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. I think that's it at this point. Facebook, if I didn't mention that, I think I did. Follow us there because we're constantly sharing news articles and training and just awareness pieces and all kinds of great information. So that's a fantastic place to start. Another thing I will send you to include in the show notes is our school bus outreach toolkit. And just to briefly explain this, hey, if you're listening to this in January and you are like motivated and activated to get involved, I'm about to share a volunteer opportunity that takes, 20 minutes max for you to do and could make an impact in your local area. So we have school bus specific training that we provide for school bus drivers. And what you can do is a quick Google search for your school district's transportation department. Find a contact there. If you can't find a contact there, send it directly to your superintendent or the principal at your school. Have them help you, escalate this to the transportation division. But ask, I have a template email. Hey, I'm a parent, or I'm just a concerned citizen. I don't have kids in the district, but I live here. Are our school bus drivers trained? If not, here's a link to the Busing on the Lookout program by Truckers Against Trafficking. It's free. It takes less than 30 minutes. Can we please implement it so that our school bus drivers know? It has some attachments and things that you can do. That is a super quick activation for you to potentially make a difference in your own town. Another thing I would say is, again, start having these conversations with your kids, with your family members. You mentioned sort of the demand aspect of this, and that is the link between the demand for commercial sex, which includes pornography, and the crime of sex trafficking. We have a really great sort of awareness piece and conversation starter called Addressing Demand Man to Man. And it is great for church groups, for book clubs, for whatever kind of group that's men, guys. Share this video, watch this video, talk about this issue so that we are understanding that link and starting to unpack the reality that if there was no demand for commercial sex, there would be no sex trafficking, because it's about that financial transaction that takes place for the traffickers. And if their market dried up, they would go on and sell something else. That's the reality. So we have to address that issue. So yes, if you want to get involved, we have a number of different ways. Visit us at truckersagainsttrafficking.org. Fill out a contact us form. Let us know sort of your position, whether it's in any of these industries or not. If you're just a general member of the general public, you're welcome to get involved too. We would love to have you, but start with that training. Download our app, Truckers Against Trafficking, on any app platform. It's fantastic for red flags at your fingertips. You can make a tip to the national hotline right from that app. great places to start. Listen to the podcast, Driving Freedom. Thank
Yep.
you for plugging it so much today.
Oh, it's so good.
It's a lot of content, bite-sized episodes though, that really help you understand and start to really pick apart the nuances of this very complex crime.
I highly recommend listening to that in the gym, because it'll make you angry when you're listening to it, and it definitely helps, motivate you to
Yes.
to get
Awesome.
that extra rep or that extra set in. So
That's great. Love it.
excellent. Well, Laura, thank you so much for joining us. I hope we get to have you back sometime in the future, because I think there's still more to talk about here with this, with what's going on with trafficking and everything. And we've just scratched the surface, and excited to see what Truckers Against Trafficking is going to do in the future.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us. It's been a blast, and really hope we've motivated some folks today to get involved. So thank you.
Absolutely. All right, Openforcers, thanks for listening. This is a really special edition of the Gig Academy. And again, please check out the show notes, get involved. If you see something, say something, and call that national hotline at 1-888-373-7888. Thanks, and have a good one.